everything shy of a cesarean section. For the next period until the newborn comes to the world, this mother in labor is going to be entirely dependent on both the will and the wisdom of these women. What she, however, is not aware is one interesting thing. These women will do more than delivering the new baby. They are the trusted custodians of the society to act as gatekeepers against disability. After the pushing is done and the baby comes, and while the mother is still exhausted or recuperating, or in some cases just deep asleep from the pains of labor, these women, or a few select of them, with midwives, will take the baby and inspect the baby from the head to the toe, examining for any sign of undesirability or specifically disability. Unknown to this woman is that in the custody of these women is tobacco, which will be used to exterminate this infant should it be determined that this child has either a disability or an undesirable outcome. Of course, the mother, in the case the child is killed, will be given the story that, hey, the child had some distress or the child died upon being born. By so doing, this group of women or the custodians to ensure that particular society had no disability, at least born in, or was really reduced. They'll take pride and say, because of them, there was no disability. Let's just hook that story on the side and let's go to a particularly fairly known story, especially in Christian circles. It's called the story of the rich young ruler. In fact, today for this, we will look at two stories. So in the story of the rich young ruler, for those who are not too acquainted with the Bible, is a young man who is fairly wealthy and has his stuff together, comes to Jesus and asks him the question about what he needs to do in order to inherit eternal life. In the question was also a veiled request to join the band of Jesus. And Jesus says in round one, like, hey, do what the commandment asks you to do. And then he says, I have done it. And then he's posed the second list of requirements, which is go sell everything you have and come follow me. And this is where things break apart for him, because as the scriptures indicate, he was a man of means. He had a lot of possession and he walks away. What most people do is they pose at that part of him going away. But what is really indicative is what happens when he's gone. It's the words of Peter. Peter turns to Jesus and tells him, we've left everything and have followed you. What will we gain in exchange? You need to understand the belief system at that time was that wealth and wellness was an indication of God's approval. In converse, poverty and disability or a lack of wellness was indicative, at least in the understanding then, that you are cast or unaccepted of God. And therefore, Peter is livid because here is a man of means who's been turned away. His inclusion into the band of disciples would have guaranteed A, a lot of money, and B, a lot of credibility, because having a man of means like him was an indication that this movement was then accepted of God. Put that story there, and let's go to another third story, and this time right there in the Bible. Jesus arrives at this place, and there is a guy who's blind. And even his very own disciples ask him a very interesting question. Who has sinned so that this person should be born this way? And it takes Jesus, before he performs a miracle, he needs to educate his very followers about the way they perceive disability. He says, neither the Father nor this person has seen. You already see it being voiced out of their mouth that the whole issue of physical disability was an anathema to them. It was so undesirable that the only way for them, it was an indication there was sin, there was fault, there was mistake. It therefore betrays not only how they thought about them, but you can also see how they treated them. In later years, when Jesus would be gone, there'd be this man seated outside the temple gate called Beautiful, but he was begging for money. People go into the weeds of how this man was able to be healed by Peter and company. But what is striking to me is his family, his team. The best they could imagine was to drop him by the side of the temple to beg. They could not think about training him. They could not think about equipping him. They could not think about elevating him to a new place. It actually seems for all the disability cases you experience, especially in scripture, it is cases of people sitting and begging, being needy or ostracized. What's common in all of these three stories, in the story from Cumberland and the story of the rich young ruler and the story of the blind person, is that there seems to be a thread in society, and this predates Christianity as a religion, because no African society was religious. So whichever religion Kambas had, and this was not just restricted to the Kamba, it was an African thing. Whichever religion the Kambas had, whichever version of Judaism the two other stories were subscribing to, it seems there was a religious thread that indicated or preferred people who are able to people who are disabled. In part, the mission of Jesus was to try and dismantle this thought, but you can clearly see it was deeply rooted that even his very own followers had to be re-educated from this. 2,000 years down the road, Christianity, Islam, the works, have we really recovered from this? Do we really have a doctrine and a belief system and a practice system that genuinely embraces the disabled? Or do we genuinely, if we carefully look, the way we structure our houses of worship, the way we preach or teach, the way we think or portray God, are we at fault of promoting ableism? When we just look at our leadership structures, and when we look at the way all through from African societies to church leadership, how many people who are not physically able or with it are really put up in it? But more so, how do we make them feel from the lens of Christianity? I think that woman with tobacco in the night is not too different from that man with a begging bowl because he's been dropped there by the same hands. One hand killed in infancy, another hand kills with victimization. I think it's time we had this authentic conversation about religion and ableism. Back to you in studio.
Thank you, Saya. And we will go to definitions, and at least I have two people from the medical fraternity, so that's gonna be easy. And Hus, we're gonna start with you because it's nicotine, and you know, we have to throw in the acetylcholine receptors, right? Just to just give us a definition of ableism from your eyes. Is Hussein? Yes, Hussein?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Oh.
Just multitasking. My apologies.
Okay, and the baby can show up. Yes. Okay, go ahead.
She will soon. She will soon. Right. I mean, okay, it's interesting you asked me that question about ableism from the medical perspective, because strictly speaking, it is probably medicine, or rather the contemporary medicine that we know of today, which probably stigmatized a lot of things about so-called disability. Because looking back at what Saya has just given us as a brief in terms of history and the way the religious perspective changed a couple of things. Interestingly enough, if I was to look at the religious perspective, fortunately, I have the luxury of coming across multiple cultures and multiple religions. So I have quite a bit of mixed blood and all in me. So if you look at if you look at the Quran itself, the term disabled is not mentioned anywhere. People are called disadvantaged. That's the difference. So anybody with even when some of the verses mentioned, there was a time when I think the Prophet was giving a sermon and a blinded person approached him, and he actually kind of ignored him because he was busy. He was immediately rebuked with one of the verses that do not turn somebody away because they're different. Just because they cannot see does not mean that they're not able to do everything else as far as pertains to religion. So what's changed along the way, I suspect, is mainly influence of others rather than religion. So they may not have contributed to disability and as such, but it's culture that's influenced most of it. That's my perspective. So medically speaking, when we talk about ableism, we're strictly defining it as anything with a disability. That's the kind of definition medicine probably gives it. If I was to interpret it, I'm not choosing a dictionary definition, but the interpretation of that. I don't believe sometimes dictionaries give the correct meaning. So which is why along the way, I might slightly differ with you on some of that, in the sense that we can't blame religion as such, whichever religion, traditional religion, the contemporary religions that exist today, of them. It's probably culture and society that's changed the perspective. So when we look at places of worship and we say that they do not include people, that is correct. Very often they don't. The couple of that I do visit when I'm back in Nairobi, interestingly enough, one has an access for a wheelchair. There is a ramp. The ramp has an incline of 60 degrees. So how on earth am I supposed to get on a wheelchair and go up an incline of 60 degrees? That defeats. You walk into the washrooms, the floors are marble flooring. Now, if I'm on crutches or I have one bad foot, how am I supposed to marble flooring? I'm going to slip and to fall because every washroom has water. You find that people have put up the bathroom sinks are at a height of about 4 feet. If I'm on a wheelchair, how am I expected to access such a washroom spot? So it comes back to, have we educated people enough to what disability or disadvantage, rather put it that way, is? And that's where I think where society has failed. It's not the religion that's failed. I think it's a society that's failed more often than not. I think I'll give it back to you, Bosa.
Okay, and Sad, you want to like avuke sakafu unyo Hussein I could join, because I think from the Christian perspective, because I've been reading the Quran, yes, there's no mention of disability anywhere, but from the Christian perspective, ableism reigns supreme, because even when you're thinking about the Levites, the ones who had to serve in the temple, you could not be of any blemish. Sayed, you want to just like pinga Hussein for like 2 seconds, and then we'll go to Mukimba?
No, I don't want to pinga him.
Okay.
I just, what am I saying? I think what Hussein is doing and doing well is explaining one boundary of ableism. And I think in my intro, just tried to explain ableism by coming through the less preference given to disability. But I think what Hussein is doing brilliantly is he is showing up, he's talking about systems that are built to favor the abled, of course, and that by so doing disadvantages the disabled. A Christianity the Bible as a text, and a lot can be said there, is, as you said, Posa, is built around a lot of ableism. However, it's most powerful story is built around disability, which is very difficult because the most powerful story in the Bible is the story of the cross. And so the whole idea of a God who comes, sheds his power, and he puts himself in a position of disadvantage, disability, and all was oxymoronic and very, we look at the cross with glorious eyes, this side of the story, but in the time when it was happening, it was the epitome of, as in the words of Paul, nonsense. This is nonsense, and to the Jews it was a stumbling block. So while yes, the Bible is full of, it is, let me put it this way, it speaks about a that is heavy on ableism. Its most powerful story at the end of the day becomes a story built around an individual at their hour of extreme disability. And it is therefore possible, just putting the two worlds together, it is therefore possible to promote ableism by creating a society and systems that favor abled, and by so doing disadvantage the disabled. And it is also possible to perpetuate ableism by intentionally discriminating and even killing and disadvantaging people who we feel are less desirable or disabled. So I think what Hussein is describing is the trunk of the elephant. I was talking about the ear. Together they are the elephant.
Okay, elephant it is. Mukimba, go ahead. A definition from, at least from the psychology, world of psychology. And we could also start taking a stab at what Hussein started, the infrastructure that we build in our houses of worship and how they're ableist.
So I think that was what I noted first, that it seems, I guess, the people who make the decisions in terms of policies and maybe even the creation of the infrastructure, they don't involve the actual people who need it. So for the wheelchair accessibility, you've got to ask the people who are using the wheelchairs, because I think that happens a lot when people who are able-bodied maybe make the decisions on behalf of the people who are differently abled. So it's definitely not helpful. I think that would be the first step, first including them in how the whole system works. But the definition I had was, ableism is discrimination in favor of people who are able-bodied, therefore putting the persons who are differently abled at a disadvantage. Of course, in mental health, that would be the people who are struggling with, the people who are probably, I guess, I don't want to use the word normal. I've been trying to figure out what would be the appropriate word to use, because I'm liking the differently abled description. It makes it a lot more sensitive, but I want to kind of find the right word for now the other ones, the ones who are not differently abled, right? What we're probably more used to. So that would be discrimination in favor of the people who probably have good mental health faculties and their brain chemistry works perfectly, and they probably don't need medication and they don't need intervention constantly. And then, in that, obviously, because they're being favored, let's say in places of employment or in places of worship or just naturally in society, that means that them receiving favor means other people are being taken already, they're differently abled, and then they're not being taken into account. So that's a complete disadvantage. So that was my description. But I think to now the second part, the answer, the question, that would be, we need to involve the people who actually are differently abled. We cannot make decisions on behalf of people when we don't know how it feels to walk in their shoes. When we don't know what they need, you have to go ask people what they need. You can't offer somebody food when their biggest problem is cold. So they need to be the ones who are involved in making the decisions. And then it will be a lot easier to kind of make sure that whatever policies and whatever infrastructure is being built around it is good and it's satisfactory to them. So that has been the issue, the fact that they're not even involved. But then, on paper, it looks like some ticks are being crossed. And, we're checking off a certain percentage and we're saying, we do have them included in this, we do have them included in this, but it's mostly for show because we're not asking them what it is that they need, whether it's in the mental health field or it's even just people who are differently abled in other ways. Yeah, I've seen typical is a better word. There's somebody who's written on the chat instead of normal, typical, right? So now I guess I'll use typical. Typical makes sense. So atypical and typical, I guess.
Okay, but we need to ask the disability gurus what they think, because these words keep changing every time. And just thinking about how we accommodate differently abled persons. Sa and Hussein, I know you have visible physical disabilities, and I'm just wondering from your experience, how has religion accommodated or not accommodated you? And Hussein, because you're the mixed person here and our Islamic brother, can we just start with you? I know you alluded to the floors, the sinks, and I could imagine how doing wudu would be different for you. Just talk about it.
Okay, okay. It's actually quite interesting, but as far as the wudu part, the ablution goes, fortunately, those are usually at ground level because most people are expected to sit and squat because you're up washing your feet as well. So fortunately, that might be pretty simple. The only thing is that I guess sometimes where it gets difficult is if, say, for example, you have to sit and, for example, somebody getting off crutches. It's as simple as attaching just something like an Arabian shower to where you do the wudu. That would solve a lot of problems. Basically, that would cost how much? 200 shillings, and you have like basically $2 or something, and you'd have that sorted out. If I was to strictly look at it in terms of most of the mosques right now, the ones that are say, for example, I guess the biggest ones still belong in Saudi Arabia, so Makkah, Medina, those are probably the largest in the world, more or less. That has changed a lot in the last maybe 15 years or so. A lot of them have decided that they get a lot of people who are differently abled, and they have set up the infrastructure for them. So they have separate lanes where you're on a wheelchair, you go on this lane, you're on crutches, you go on this lane. If you have that different washrooms, different areas for them to use so they never get inconvenienced. So such places have begun to change that culture over the last maybe 15 years or so. What becomes a problem to me, I guess, is that the one thing that's missing, very few of the religious leaders, rather the top religious leaders who do some of the preaching and some of the scholarly work. Unfortunately, those are still limited in terms of those who are differently abled. So say, for example, the one good thing that I've noticed is that the Quran is available in Braille, and I'm glad for that because a lot of people can still read it. I'm actually happy for that. But where it gets difficult is when you look at most of the sermons that people give, very few of those sermons focus on people who are on the margins of society. They always focus on the person who's supposedly, I guess, I'll use the term typical, I guess I'll use that instead. They very much likely focus on such people. So if you have a different way of doing things, the dogmatic belief is that even that wudu to perform the prayer must be done in a specific way. So if you don't do it that way because you have a different approach to it, you do not qualify to perform your prayer, or you do not qualify to do certain things. That misconception still exists. Yet the interesting part about the Prophet's teachings were, he was very open to the idea that the people who do things differently, yet they're not wrong, as long as they achieve the basic tenets that were meant to be achieved, you are fine to do things the way you do them. There was no dogma. That's what his teachings were. So that's that's what I think needs to change. Well, some of the places I do attend, well, most of the places expect you to sit down on a mat or a carpet. That's what most of the mosques were designed to do, because most people are going to pray that way. So you'll find very few places that have chairs at the back for people to sit in case they can't squat or they can't sit down. They do not have, now, I guess Saya can attest to that, but where you have a lot of carpets, if you are using the walking cane, it tends to muffle what you're going to hear sometimes. So the vibrations you get back from that cane may not be as clear as you would on a solid floor, which a lot of the people who cannot see clearly use to move around. That's not been catered for. They have the acoustics within some of the mosques. If I have problems with my hearing, sometimes I may not be able to hear certain things. They don't cater for me. So these are some of the things that need to change. And I still think we are far behind as far as such people go. We still consider them out. I mean, come to think of it, even in medical school. It's interesting, but there was an article I was just reading, it's pretty recent, that about 20% of medical students do have some form of physical disability. Forget about mental, but physical. Yet most of the medical school curriculum is not designed for them. So the general assumption is that somewhere along the way, they're going to get tired and they're going to fall out of the system and naturally get eliminated from medical school. So you don't have that in the medical school boards, you don't have that uncomfortable meetings where you have to decide what you do with such people. How do you take care of them? How do you mentor them? How do you get them through medical school? So they would rather lose us along the way than let us continue. That's the sad part of it. I'll give back to you, Pastor.
Okay, thank you, Hussein. And Sir, just the same question. How has I know the churches we grew up in, Kibera SDA and Bagathi SDA, by the way. Our choir master was a wheelchair user. And I remember some of the children of someone we grew up with had I think they were on the autism spectrum. I cannot really remember what they had, but they were allowed to conduct the choir, and it wasn't supposed to just be prim and proper and all the fluff and ugly looking stuff shoved away, which was a different experience when we went to Nairobi Central Church, though they've included what is it called, the deaf sign language, I think, if I'm not wrong. But just how has religion accommodated or not accommodated you, bearing in mind that you're legally blind? Or sign language interpreters, my gosh. Karen, thank you.
So I know there's my lived experience and there's my observed experience. So for those who don't know, I'm legally blind. So for the longest time, my experience in Africa. So I want to pass on my responses with there's an infrastructure, then there's a relationship, and then there's a doctrine. So I'll try do that, and then I'll do it at two levels for my lived experience and for those I have observed. So as a person, reading the Bible was challenging, and reading was difficult because most of it was in small fonts and stuff. It was after I cleared high school that a certain lady who just was very committed to my spiritual growth and helping me grow in my ministry. Her name is Margaret. Got me a huge Bible with giant text, and not large, giant, text. I still remember big green Bible, and it became iconic with me everywhere. Guys just knew me with this big Bible. Problem is, even when I went home with it, when I went to my own family with it, they made fun. They said, "Hey, Bible is huge." And not just remembering that, hey, this guy, it was actually very comfortable for me to read. The Bible was heavy, actually very heavy. But all the rest of the material I had to read from church was just the normal font for every person, which meant I read slower, I read longer, and I also preach. It ended up influencing my preaching style because I realized when I have to read from normal material or from PowerPoints and everything, I struggle. I basically can't read any of those things. And if you see me preach reading from stuff like that, I almost sound like a stammerer or like a stutter because I'm struggling to read. So it influenced my preaching style. I now had to commit like scripture to memory and begin to speak extemporaneously. I'm not too sure that would be what I would always do. So I don't, for instance, I don't preach with PowerPoints. I don't preach with reading text because it's not a brilliance thing. It's a disability thing. But I think majority of the people didn't know that. And even maybe many guys who are hearing it today is when they realize. Some, in fact, thought I was copying other preachers. No, I began committing scripture to memory from childhood out of necessity as a result of that. So it is only way later in life that I realized, like within my denomination, there's something called Christian Services for the Blind, which does well in North America. And I remember I only once got material from them back home, but there just seems to be something that is off with getting that material for the blind out there. So infrastructure-wise, a lot more can be done for people like me. I realized like my own church, Nairobi Central Church, does have a ramp to get into the main sanctuary, but does not have a ramp for a long time to get to the pulpit. So like if you're physically disabled, there's no for you to get to the pulpit, there are stairs, there's no ramp going all the way through. And I was thinking like, wow, that wasn't well thought through. To go to the pastor's office is a fleet of stairs on both sides, the pastor's office is up. So completely unfriendly for somebody with like a walking disability cannot be able to access. And you can imagine this is, so like my church is one of the more progressive, more elite, churches. So you can imagine the condition elsewhere. People with physical disabilities don't seem to have been, especially walking disabilities, don't seem to have been accommodated too well on the infrastructure part of it. Increasingly lately, I see a lot of sign language has been introduced in various churches, but it's not ubiquitous. It's not there in every church for obvious reasons. And what that means is that, for instance, if you are one who needs sign language services, you have to then look for a church that offers sign language, which would mean I could be living in location X, but I have to travel all the way to location Y, because that's the only place I'll get a church that meets or ministers my needs. So infrastructure-wise, there is an amount of challenge. Doctrine-wise, there's an amount of understanding, there's empathy. I think part of it is African, but then I don't think there is adequate, there's adequate awareness on how to communicate or to understand people with disabilities. I'll give two examples. So I have a friend who has a child with one of the spectrum in autism, and their sort of expression is that they were very restless, and of course they shout a lot in church. And you could clearly see when this person comes to church, they're being given the eyes for like, hey, get a hold of your child. And many people are being given that condemning look for, hey, you've not trained your child properly. You're the kind of bad parents and everything. And people not understanding or appreciating, hey, this is, the parent is not at fault and stuff. And therefore, he began noticing, like, when he comes, people move where they sit and stuff like that. I don't know if that is a religious thing or is just bad human behavior, but the fact that he experienced it within the context of a church, and it is not the exception, is something to be left to be desired. Similarly, as a result of my visual problem, I had to explain this to my wife and to a friend that I walk, my feet also serve as a cane. Like I feel the spaces I walk with my feet. It's something I've done for so long. It's second nature. So when you see me walk, you think I limp, okay? But my feet are fantastic. It's just accommodation for that. And what I realized is people had been talking about it behind the scenes. It just took one of my friends some courage to ask me, like, dude, you know, all along, us guys know you just limp. We've always gossiped about you. And it was like 10 years after being with these kind of friends. And so it got me thinking, like, if people don't have the courage to empathize or talk and, you know, ask and inquire and just make certain conclusions about individuals like me, I'm imagining what they do for other people. So there's a way we continue with ableism by making certain assumptions, especially in religious communities, and rather than confront, we are behind the scenes gossiping or making certain conclusions. And this now finally, outside of my own religious, my own denomination, in faith traditions where they believe in the miraculous and, you know, like a God will heal you and do all of that. And there's a lot of what I call an unfair exploitation of people with disabilities, and which promotes ableism in a very negative way. So there are people who manufacture miracles or who portray that, hey, if you receive the Holy Spirit, for instance, you will walk and your eyes will be opened and your ears will be able to hear. Well, that communicates to the disabled or differently enabled guy in the congregation who's not being healed of their leg issues or their ear issues or their eye issues, is that, hey, I don't have the Holy Spirit, or there's something amiss with me. And that particular subsection of the doctrine, which is a branch of prosperity evangelism that says, when you receive God, he's going to heal you, he's going to do this. And if you believe and if you have faith, it does a lot of harm. It's almost the same way, it's the closest I can, you know, poor example is back in high school when people were being prayed for and everyone falls. The kid who doesn't fall begins walking around feeling like there's something wrong with me. So much as they may be well-meaning or they may be marketing themselves, the whole teaching that when you come to God, he absolutely must be able to heal you does a lot to promote ableism, but then dents a lot of the spirit of the people who have physical disabilities. So I think I've mixed it all. The three parcels are infrastructure, lots need to be improved. To get people with various disabilities. My own church has an upstairs section, a balcony section without a ramp. So if you're having leg issues, to get up will be struggling. So infrastructure needs to be improved. Relationships need to be improved so that people don't gossip or make conclusions. And then theology, the theology that we have around about what God can and cannot do and what your physical disability shows or does not show, needs to be genuinely challenged, because by so doing, we may be spreading more hurt than healing. Back to you, Pastor.
I think the other aspect also is the amount of religious text we need to read. For instance, Elisha had a terminal illness. Elisha, who was raising people from the dead, had a terminal illness, which he died from. The prosperity gospel has done a lot of harm, and I think they need to reckon with that. And I think we, especially from the Christian religion, we need to be a bit more interrogative of our text, interrogative of the interpretations that different preachers use, and just read to understand and look for meaning and understanding, and not just the fluff that is there. And in terms of Nairobi Central, unless it is brought down and reconstructed, I mean, the stairs at the front, I was just looking at it when I was preparing for this presentation. I was like, my goodness, the stairs at the front and going to the balcony, even Nairobi Pentecostal Church, Sitam Valley Road, you need an elevator for people with disabilities. It's obvious what needs to be done for people with obvious disability, visible disabilities, the people with walking disabilities, wheelchair users, people who don't see, like yourself, Saya. But I'm just wondering, how do we cater for the people with the invisible disabilities, and not very obvious like the spectrum, the people who have, for instance, depression, mood disorders, and all the mental illnesses. We don't seem to cater for them. And as part of the work I'm currently doing, it's on a dementia project. And part of the older people who are getting into dementia are feeling left out by the church, because when people see Mama Nani is forgetful or is peeing on herself, she's shunned away, and yet religion was a very big deal for her. So I don't know, what do we need to do? What are we doing right? And Mukimba, you can take a stab at that.
First, I think for mental health, it's like the flip side of ableism, because a lot of people say you don't look unwell. So it's very easy for it to just, either be brushed off. And like you said, with the whole idea of prosperity gospel, that does not help it one bit, because all you're told is to focus on your positive thoughts and, focus on all the right things, supposedly. And that should probably make your depression go away, or you do not fear, so your anxiety should disappear. And there's still a long ways to go, especially when it comes to religion and understanding mental health. There is a huge gap, because mental health issues, even from something as probably very common among people, like something like addiction, it's probably really shunned upon, and religion does not have any space for that. And addiction, is just a conclusion of sin, and there's no consideration of what mental health factors have to come into play in such places. So first, we have a long way to go, but again, I think the awareness and then the training, even of the clergy, again, that would really make a huge difference. The clergy being able to kind of know how to handle even members of the congregation, because people do trust the church. Especially, I'm speaking because I'm a Christian, so I know how the church works. And most people who go to church trust their pastors, they trust their leaders in church, and they trust them more than even a mental health professional. So they go for advice, they go for, my son is going through this and this and that, and my son is addicted to all these things, so help me. And the pastor the idea is, let's pray, and let's just, if the prayer is not working, something else, your faith is not enough, or all the other reasons that could be given, or there's a sin that needs to be dealt with and all that stuff. So that's not very helpful. So if these people can also understand, the clergy and the leadership in church, they should get some type of training. They should allow for inclusion. Even I was thinking, I had watched a story about a church, I think it's in the US, where they had noted a lot of the congregation had children with ADHD, and the main Sunday school was not able to cater for any types of kids who were, I think, for things like ADHD or autism, would be probably better to call them people who are differently abled rather than just people living with disabilities. But they were doing so much for them. There was a playroom that had so many different features that were specifically curated for that. Now, of course, considering not many churches may have that type of a budget, but at least even some type of training for the Sunday school teachers so that they can know how to handle the differently abled kids, the kids with sort of like their brains are operating very differently, and most of them don't have that training. So a lot of the people who are working in church spaces don't have training. So my biggest place would be the training part. Yeah, the awareness of the public, that would be amazing. That would definitely make a huge difference. You know, if people want, I'll say, even for myself, to be honest, there are times I am like, if I find somebody who may be differently able or living with a disability, I do shy off, to be honest, sometimes, because I will shy off to asking very blatant questions because I don't know whether they are intrusive. So that would be some of the things that maybe I would like some, because I'm also here to learn, but that would be some of the things that I would also want to ask. When is it intrusive? When is it not intrusive, to ask a few more questions instead of us, you know, going probably gossiping about it in the background, but maybe because we just never knew how to ask. So I'll say I have been guilty of that, not being able to being straightforward and asking, you know, the mom with a child who is behaving a little bit different from maybe how my child would behave. So awareness also for the public, even for some of us who probably should know better, but awareness and training. I think that would make a huge difference, especially for mental health, because mental health is not visible. Mental health, you can always pinpoint it and say, I know this person is going through 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So for mental health, there's that tendency to be very dismissive of it, because we know, most people know very little of it. So awareness and a lot of training for the clergy, for everybody involved. That will make a huge difference.
Yes, I think we had this discussion. Am I echoing? Yeah, I'm echoing. Okay, I think we had this discussion when we did the religious trauma, when Pastor Bundi was here, and Pastor Bundi is Kenyan and US trained. And for the religious leaders here, there's an obvious push and movement to train them in matters mental health. Because when you think about, I know there's a fiasco of degree certificates going around. If they were to do the same audit for pastors in Kenya, we would faint. So part of the religious education, even for the pastors who've called themselves to preach, needs to include mental health and other things. There are two cadres of workers who need to be better equipped in handling all these visible and invisible disabilities, and that's the clergy and the human resource practitioners in Kenya, because they bear a huge burden that should not be theirs. And I don't think that curriculum is included in their education. Hussein, from the Islamic perspective, what are you doing? What are the imams and the mosques and the masjids doing different that we could borrow a leaf from, we as Christians and basically Christians? Yes.
I think that's probably a lot of it comes back to what's a lot of the verses, I guess, from the Quran mentioned. Maybe that's why some of the things are looked at slightly differently, where culture does not influence the religious teachings themselves. So, for example, that it's interesting, but a lot of the verses talk about and then the Prophet's teachings that that I guess would now be, there's the Quran and then there's the Sunnah. The Sunnah are his teachings now, which focus on anybody who was different in society. So you say you could be different because you had a disability. You could be different because you are an orphan. You could be different because you're what do you call this? You have well, alcohol existed at that time as well, so you could have an addiction as well. So his teachings were such that do not judge the person based on who they are. Judge the person on whom they can become. That's what his teachings always were. So most of the religious preachers are taught to tell you that accept this person for who they are right now. There's always a chance that they will change given the opportunity to change. And that's what's always been preached throughout the time from beginning, that it's not you to decide whether this person is good or bad, whether this person is different from you. It's for you to accept them for who they are and then find out what they want to change and what you would like them to change. So that's what most of the teachings have come down from the Prophet. It's unfortunate that culture has changed a lot of things. So say, for example, he asked to look at certain parts of northern Pakistan. They had a very large number of people affected by the polio virus. So they have a significant population in certain villages who have paralysis of the lower limbs. Now, a lot of them were being neglected and were not being allowed to perform certain functions in society. Unfortunately, it took the intervention of the Supreme Council of in Pakistan to step forward and state that these are not people who should be shunned from society. Accept them into that society, make that village grow with its own people. So those are some of the teachings that have changed. A lot of it is because of the Prophet's teachings, and we hope that continues. The only place where it may be a little bit difficult is when it comes to, say, substance misuse and substance abuse disorders. So because alcohol and anything that alters your mental state is to be shunned, very often people end up using hard drugs, say cocaine, marijuana, such things. They are sometimes treated as outcasts. That is one thing that Islam needs to change. It shouldn't consider that they are lost cause. There's still a chance you can change their addiction and bring them back. Where it's the silent disorders, so say the mental, say, so things like depression, dementia, schizophrenia. The whole purpose of the teachings were that your parents, or rather the elderly in society, are the way to heaven lies at their feet, they're teaching. So you cannot disrespect any of them just because they've become old. You do not consider them worthless. Because the one thing they have to give you is still their wisdom and their teaching, so they can never be left alone. Which is where things change, so that a lot of the elderly people, very often, were never turned away into homes, old age homes or anything. Old age homes. They were always kept within a certain family unit. And that's how some of that has been handled. So you never find anybody walking around the streets because they'll be taken in by a family if you're elderly. If you don't have children and you die, or your children died before you, then it's the society around you that's responsible for looking after you. So you're never left alone. Somebody has to step in and look after you. That's where maybe some of the teachings are slightly different, as long as culture does not interfere. Because if you cross the border and end up into India from Pakistan, that's different now. The culture has changed that, and people who have a lot of the any of the mental or physical disabilities are generally shunned and can even be killed at a younger age, like that used to happen here before in Africa. So that's the sad part. We need to avoid confusing culture and religion. Those two should meet. They should not conflict with each other. I'll get back to you, Pasa.
Okay, and I'm just wondering, what is the value of having like a mass service most time that's just dedicated to people living with disabilities? I know, for instance, there's a church near where I live where there's a specific service for children with various forms of disabilities, usually mental disabilities. What's the value of doing that? And do you think it's something the religious leaders would be open to doing? Sir, because you preach, would it be something you do?
Yes, it's, you see, we've been able to restructure church services, for instance, to intentionally include sections for things we want to promote or things that we want to give priority to. So we've been able to have sections for raising money for, say, building a church or creating awareness about a mission project, or we've institutionalized things like children's stories within the church program. So are we able to restructure church services or have dedicated days to speak to the issue of ableism or differently enabled people? Yes. Are there churches doing that? Yes. I do know there are churches that have days or a particular service dedicated to people to address the question of it. But just like Hussein said, and something you intimated, a service alone would do good in as far as creating awareness and keeping the conversation going. But the whole process of integrating our differently enabled brothers and sisters into the religious community, and also intentionally fighting ableism, is not going to just be solved by having a service here, a service there. It'll need something a bit, it'll need going back to addressing wrong theological interpretations. It'll need to go back to addressing infrastructure issues, so that it's one thing for you to throw for me a disability Sabbath, but it is another thing for me to keep coming to your church and finding that, yeah, the restrooms make sense for me, the access to the building makes sense. So infrastructure changes, theology changes, and then the awareness does not need to be a one-off token. It needs to be something that is more continuous. It may mean that even in the training of preachers or people who take to the pulpit like myself, when we are giving examples, we need to have, like when you're preaching or teaching or instructing, you need to give examples that have the disabled or differently enabled individuals in mind. We normally give examples that have women in mind, children in mind, youth in mind, fathers in mind, mothers in mind, but we don't normally have that intentionality to have examples, on an ongoing basis. So, which therefore means that when somebody is listening to our messages, the meta narrative over time has been subconsciously that if you're a normal, or what we've come to accept as a normal individual, who's a male or a female or a married, that's the place for you. But if we begin also including examples and intentionally having people who go to, say, upfront to lead worship, whether it's the singers and the people, say, reading scripture, or even the preacher, if we have people who have visible or who speak more openly about their disabilities, it also helps connecting with that. It helps the people who are differently enabled to be able to connect with the same. And then I think there'll also need to be, we need to go beyond just an occasional day and have disabled people within the core leadership, not token leadership, not periphery, not feel good or a voyeur position, but people who make important decisions will be there. You can be sure that if somebody who's either who's living with somebody with cerebral palsy is in a decision-making, is in the church building committee, they will want that factored in. If somebody who is having to move around on, say, crutches or a wheelchair is in church leadership at all levels, they'll want policies and decisions made with that in mind. If somebody is building in the curriculum building team is somebody with visual impairments, they will want to voice and say, like, wait, when we're designing these learning experiences within church, how are we thinking about guys who can't see well, how are we going to include them? So I think some of those, just more than an occasional day or a token here, I think more holistic change like that would enable us become better.
And that will just call for a societal change, because we have to change with the way people with disabilities are represented. I mean, for a long time, we only had Miri Atino and Ruben Kigame and the other younger singer as the people with visible disabilities, and they all have visual disabilities, were representing that community. I think, yeah, it needs a societal change, because if there's change at home, there's change in schools, there's change in churches, and you can vote with your tithe money, there's gotta be a change in the whole society. I'm opening the floor for questions if you want to unmute and ask a question with tact and respect. The floor is open. And for the panelists, if there's something I haven't touched on, please, you can just stab, prod, ask, include. Any questions, and anyone willing enough to talk about it?
Hello, panelists. This is Karen here from Nairobi, and I'm autistic myself. I just want to comment about what you've just covered, especially to Saya. You've covered a great deal of what you've mentioned. We call it the charity model. I'll describe it in layman's language, is that the charity model just views persons with disabilities as just pity objects to exploit and just anything. So I hope I got it just right. Okay, to my question now, I'm a Catholic myself, and I have been dealing with discrimination on the basis of my disability, autism, for quite some time now. What tips can you give me in order for me to carry out my awareness to, especially to the Catholic community, who still thinks that autistic people should be locked away? I don't know how you can assist on that. Thank you.
So one is you share this video with them. We of course lazima tupige debe. To Lillian, do you want to answer the question, or do you want to ask a different question?
I want to comment on something related, but not exactly that. So just finish answering her, and then I'll give my comment.
Okay. Hussein Saya Mukimba. Can someone take a stab at Karen's question? Jamini.
Oh, I'll give it to Saya because I'm not too familiar, or even Mukimba, because I'm not too familiar with some of the Christianity aspects, right? I'll hand it to one of them.
Okay, Mukimba, go ahead.
No, I honestly, I felt like she already had the vocabulary to explain herself pretty well, and she has the best understanding. And I think that's what we've been saying, that it has the inclusivity of the people who are, who are the people living with the disabilities. They're the ones who are going to make the difference, because an assumption from somebody else is not really going to be able to hit the point. She has, she has the words, she has vocabulary, she has a clear understanding, and she would be the best person in place to do that. So I think, like she said, share the video and then keep doing what she's doing, and just trusting that there will be changes, probably looking for allies around and trying to make as many connections and trying to find other people who are like-minded, and just keep doing what she's doing, because she has a vocabulary. I felt very confident in what she was saying. So I feel like that whatever she's already started doing, just keep doing that.
Is there an equivalent of continuous religious education, not theory? The way for us professionals, like in the medical world, it's continuous medical education, continuous professional development. Karen, do you have an equivalent in the Catholic side, like things that are not religion, but they affect the religion. In the SDS setting, we call it family life education. Like you talk about anything from how to clean your hair to your fruits and how to handle the family. I think this would be an important place to introduce this topic, so that even if you just change one person, you're going to build slowly, because the change will not happen in one day. Yeah. Do you have an equivalent of continuous? If it's not there, we are owning that. Sir, we have a new t-shirt, continuous religious education.
No, there is this continuous pastoral education.
No, not pastoral for the pastors, like for just lay people. Is there something like that? Like the equivalent of family life, but in the Catholic side.
Okay. I don't know. Okay.
Okay, Karen, go ahead.
Unfortunately, we've not started on this. We're trying to form maybe a community especially for individuals with psychosocial and intellectual disabilities. This is one group that has been rejected a lot on the basis of disability. I wanted it to, because I've spoken to one of my members of our parish, and we've decided to form a group, but I don't know as to how far it has reached as of yet. So I'm yet to follow up on that, but it's in its planning stage at the moment. We're still trying to get as many people to be on board with this, because this is a new thing, and it has to be led by actual people with the psychosocial and intellectual disabilities, including myself, who is autistic.
And it doesn't have to be led by people with disabilities. Like, I'm a huge proponent and a champion for people living with disabilities. And the other thing is, do not Kenyanize the problem. Don't be paralyzed by analysis. You need to know how this Zoom conversation started. It was two people, and we just kept going, because you just keep going one person at a time. Don't overanalyze it. Just start. That one, even I can offer Zoom services, and we just start the convo. My PB side can show up and just help you start. Just start. Because if you start analyzing, kipa imara ikuje, no, you will never move on. There's no day it will be perfect to start. Start where you are, and panel beat it, shape it somewhere. You'll get there. Does that make sense?
We also have a few guys within our group who are non-autistic. We have someone who has worked with, I think, Dr. Josephine Omondi. She's a psychiatrist. Yes, she's a psychiatrist at Kenyatta Hospital. She also is a member of our parish. Yeah. So I think I'm thinking I should do that with her. Both we can involve non-autistic parishioners in this, but 50%, as per the CRPD, we want to follow the disability model. According to the CRPD, 50% of the representation has to be led by persons with disabilities. So I'm actually following what the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities are saying in regards to representation. So I just want to follow the disability model and also the CRPD.
And just tweak it to fit your situation. Yeah, because sometimes that you might not get that percentage. Just go ahead.
Yeah.
Lillian, go ahead.
Thank you so much.
To chime in. Sorry.
Lillian, just wait. Just kidogo. Kuna mwalimu.
Okay.
Lina, just go ahead then, Lillian. Lina, then my God, L. Lina, then Lillian. Yeah. Okay.
This is my 2 cents to Karen. I think she's going it the wrong route, and she will. There'll be so much impediment coming from the other side, because once you try and go a certain model, the church, because it has ground rules and all that, there will be resistance. what she needs to do is put herself in a strategic place. You know, they always say the good girls don't get the corner office. Put yourself in strategic places. If you're good at something in church, don't waste that moment to, you know, say, by the way, I'm all this and I'm a person living with autism and all that. Because if you try and put all the strategic things in place, remember the church also has, okay, like the SDA church has its own rules and regulations, and you must follow this and you must do that. Sometimes when you try to contest against the church, you will find a lot of resistance. For me, I would really advise you put yourself in a very strategic place and be quote unquote the naughty girl and try and get the word out. Like whatever your vision is, do it in a very strategic way and not necessarily in a model, like, because we're in Kenya and sometimes the church and its coins, because it does take money for it to have that kind of docket where there is persons living with disability or abled differently. That means there's money that needs to be brought into church so that specific people can come in and cater for that kind of people. So think about it and then strategize otherwise.
Lillian, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you so much for this discussion. It's been wonderful. And the only thing I'd like to add to current situation is befriending the right people. So sometimes when you have a big agenda and an agenda that will probably require resources and people and goodwill, it may do well to befriend the right people and not necessarily try to get to as many people as possible. So like in the SDA setup, that would probably be the head elder, or you know, somebody quite influential in the church. People have a way of listening to and, you know, obeying opinions of people, despite, you know, all of us being given our own brain to reason. But sometimes when something is said by somebody specific, you might find more people leaning towards it. And then my next comment was the role of social media. Social media has actually been beneficial, if I would say that, when it comes to dealing with persons living with disabilities, especially for me in the health sector and especially in the business that deals with children who have developmental and behavioral challenges. So as I don't know if I should call myself able, because so far a disability has not yet been diagnosed, but you know, anytime that can change. So as an able person, all you know about some of these disabilities is what you read in the books and what you are taught in school. However, the lived experience or the day-to-day living experience may vary greatly from what you've read in the books. And that information can only come from the person who is living with that said disability. And going on social media, I have found so much information. There are people who put their daily lives on Instagram or on TikTok or on Twitter. They basically share how it is. What exactly does it mean to live with autism, for example? Yes, we all know as healthcare workers, they will have challenges communicating, challenges socializing, challenges perhaps keeping with the typical demands that are made on 90% of the children. But what exactly does that make them feel? And so these social media accounts have been really eye-opening, especially for those who are abled or neurotypical. And so maybe as a recommendation is for those of you who are typical and perhaps don't know what exactly it means, just go on social media and just follow anybody who's perhaps living with autism, who's living with cerebral palsy. There's so many of them out there today living with ADHD. They chronicle their lives and they do videos and they do posters explaining what exactly are their challenges day to day. And I found out so much, including how dating is for them, how getting married is for them, what challenges they face as people living with disabilities, how they feel when they come to hospital and their symptoms are dismissed or minimized or exaggerated, whichever the case may be, how it is for them in studying and what works for them, what methods of teaching works for them. And I think that has become very beneficial for me. And I would encourage the rest of us to do that. And even for the churches that, you want to open their eyes to people living with disabilities, maybe they can follow such accounts and see how it is that church has treated such people and where exactly they can improve. Thank you.
Daktari, thank you very much. And if you think you're not able to make change, the long COVID, what we're calling long COVID, or what we medics have coined post-acute sequelae of COVID, was a diagnosis from the layman side. It wasn't from the medic world. And the other influence, because I'm from Minnesota, Lizzo, the singer, put a word in her lyrics that the disability world was up in arms, and she changed the lyric. Someone that popular changed the lyric. You can influence wherever you are. Follow people on Twitter. They have awesome. I've learned so much from the disability Twitter, as they call it, that I never learned when I was in medical school or in practice. So thank you, Daktari Asante Sana. Billy Kimara, go ahead.
Thank you so much. Yes, my name is Billy Kimara, and I'm so glad to hear what Karen had to say earlier. My reaction is to the speaker who spoke before, Lillian, the one who goes by L. The reason why I'm in support with what Karen was saying when she quoted the CRPD as a global convention is basically the same reason why I will be in support of CEDAW. That's the Convention on the Elimination of Against All These Forms of Discrimination Against Women. We cannot just go picking and choosing what parts of these conventions should be applied within our local environments. Her idea that that's the wrong strategy, that shouldn't be used within the local Catholic Church, is really not a good approach. For CRPD, if they talk about nothing about us without us, it's because they require representation. People with disabilities need to be part of the decision-making process. They've been excluded from it for too long, just allowing this to continue going because there's a more established and more recognized power differential, which is coming from the church institution, does not help them. They cannot keep on just being relegated to the same position which they have been for generations. Change has to come from within society. It has to come from within the affected. That's why they need to be part of it. Okay, they need equal representation. So it's not about trying just to get things done. It's about getting them done right. Thank you so much.
And so, Billy, this is my challenge to you, because so who will bell the cat? Who will start it off? If we are going to wait for 50% representation, what happens? Like, I don't know. I'm not. I know we need to do things right, but if for lack of a better word, if the people with disability wamekandamizwa so much that no one can speak for them, yet there are people who are so far, like Dr. Lillian said, I have not had any disability, but I'm a huge champion for them. Would you kick me out, and would you wait for other people with disabilities to join this board for you to start?
But that is not the point. Nobody is talking about a lack of collaboration. What we are talking is about not propagating this myth of exclusion, okay? We are not, this is not a numbers game. We are not talking that it has to be X number of people here or there. We're just saying that persons with disabilities need to have the same opportunity to participate in the decision-making processes. Okay? As long as that becomes one of our guiding principles throughout, and it doesn't change, it will lead to that change of behavior, that attitude, which is so much needed. Okay? It will help bring down these social barriers, which is the reason why persons with disabilities are where they are to begin with. That's why it's an inequitable situation that they have to deal with every day. It also calls for sensitization towards what they're facing, okay? So there has to come that, yes, it has to be done in collaboration with the ableist world, okay? It's not we versus them.
Okay.
It's collaborative effort. But all these things, all these tiny little nuances have to be taken into consideration. Thank you so much.
Okay, that's very clear. Hussein has had to step away.
So can
His
I
party
say
shot.
something?
Sorry, just give me let me just say Hussein's party shot. My party shot would be learn to separate culture, religious teachings, and context. That's his party shot. Go ahead, Syed.
I like a statement that I think it was President Obama said. He said every person who's born into the United States, I'm paraphrasing, is born with the duty of working towards making the union, because the United States, of working towards a more perfect union. So it's an incremental work. I like that thinking, the understanding that, hey, the union of states is not perfect, and we make progress incrementally. Now, the same applies for life. The older I am growing, and you do realize I've lived with my disability for 3 decades or slightly more, the more I'm realizing that whether in politics, in science, in governance, most changes do not happen, most enduring changes are actually not very radical, okay? It's not very revolutionary, it's more incremental. We take a little, we solidify, we keep doing that, we solidify. The reason I'm saying that is because then I agree with the whole idea of, hey, the ideal is we need to get to 50% representation, but the real is we are not there. And the real is, if today we go and demand 50% of representation in churches, we'll be seen as rabble rousers, and we'll get into all ad hominem fights, and people will castigate about our motives and stuff. But if we begin thinking about the 50% as a target, and we ever continue working towards it, and the ideas that have been suggested are tools towards perfecting that situation. People don't like data. You can throw all data at people, but people get inspired by stories. So I actually like the idea of just sharing your own story, your struggle, how you've been able to, and people begin realizing, wait a minute, cerebral palsy is actually a thing, and we need to, this is how churches can begin getting better. Once that story, that conversation begins getting going, then the thing that Lena was saying about positioning yourself, building alliances, then gets all of there. So I don't think the ideas that have been shared is either pick one and run with that, but I think it's a toolkit, it's a Swiss Army knife. We need to build relationships, we need to build awareness, we need to share our stories. So it's not if or, so who will bell the cat? Is assuming we actually need to first create the bell, locate the cat, bring the two together. We might actually just begin by chasing the cat, then putting a piece of metal on the cat, and within no time, the cat will be fully belled. So again, to Karen and to people like myself who have to raise this level of awareness, perfectionism is the best gateway to procrastination. So when we wait for the thing to be perfect before it's done, will lead to procrastination. It is to begin with the thing that nobody can challenge: our story, our reality, our experience. And when we begin from there, we begin by building alliances. And then as we begin with the power of our story, we can then keep on expanding and showing like, hey, it's not enough for it to only be done for me. How can we make this work for 10 more and for 20 more and for 50 more? And as we keep increasing that way, before we know it, we've expanded the space, we've improved better. So start somewhere, start small, but start with your story that cannot be challenged. That would be my idea.
Okay, sawa sawa. And you're the last panelist. Everyone else has had to leave. Thank you very much. Unless there's anyone else with a burning question, I think we've covered the topic. If you can just share this video with Karen, with your parish, and with Dr. Omondi, and she can text me. She has my number. And just start this conversation. And if you have another angle of religious trauma that you want us to cover, you can post it on the Facebook page where this video will appear, and we'll pick it up from there. Unless otherwise, Asanteni, thank you for being a very beautiful audience, and thank you for the ones who shared. Billy, you need to speak more. Karen, you need to speak more. Dr. Lillian, as usual, thank you very much. And the ones who've left, thank you very much. Saya, as usual, Asante Sana. And you may leave at your own pleasure. I will stop recording in case there's someone who has a question they don't want to hang out in the interwebs.